apple trees on the 6th floor, of which he had heard. However, this was a problem which Cocytus, who was responsible for the safety of Nazarick, could do nothing about. After all, since he was assigned to protection duties, he could not go searching around outside. Demiurge, who had gone around laying foundations outside, would surely solve this problem in the end. One could say that it was only to be expected. His friend had accomplished his mission. It was an admirable deed, and Cocytus was glad for him. However, the flames of jealousy smoldered within him. The fact that his comrade could aid one of the supreme beings, the master whom he worshipped, filled him with jealousy. His own calling was the defense of Nazarick. This weighty task was arguably more important than any order given to the other guardians. If questioned, any vassal would agree that it was an important task. After all, they could not let common riffraff set foot into the sanctum of the supreme beings. However, Cocytus could not prove his devotion and loyalty without any intruders. That was why Cocytus wanted to prove himself here by obtaining good results. To the guardians, aiding their master was a source of great delight. Cocytus wanted to experience that joy as well. Currently, a chance for that stood before him. Cocytus turned to look at the image within the mirror and gripped his scroll tightly. The mirror did not reflect the interior of the room, but instead it showed part of the swamp. The scene within the mirror of remote viewing was the reason why Cocytus had spent the past 2 days in the log cabin which Aura had built. This battle, when one considered the absolute power of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, it was more like a slaughter, was little more than a way to recover corpses. When he had received this sacred task, Cocytus's master had also laid down several stipulations. The first rule was that Cocytus was forbidden to set foot on the battlefield. Naturally, that extended to his servants as well. He was to use the forces allocated to him to deal with this problem. The second rule was that the elder Lich who had been designated as the army's commander was to be held back until the end. The third rule was that he had to make as many decisions by himself as possible. There had been other details besides that, but those were the most important of the orders he had been given. His task was to achieve victory, using only the forces deployed to the lakeside. However, if he could do it, he could demonstrate his loyalty to his great master. Thank you very much. Please convey my thanks to Ainsama. And Toma nodded disinterestedly. Then, will you be returning? No, I was given instructions to observe the outcome of this battle. So she was to be an observer then. Cocytus's blood boiled as he realized the importance of his task. Then it was about time to begin. Cocytus cast message and gave his orders to the commander of the undead army. Advance. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. 2 bonfires blazed on either side of the raised platform, bathing the surroundings in flickering light. On the platform were several lizard men, including the chiefs, leaders, and other important figures from each tribe. Before the platform were many battle-ready lizard men. The clamor from them rose and fell like the tide. It stemmed from their unease, worry, and fear. They struggled to hide all these emotions, but they could not hide the quaking in their hearts. This was the eve of battle. The friends beside them might become corpses in an instant, or they themselves might fall in combat. They would soon be heading to the cruel place that was the battlefield. Shasuria Shasha stepped forward from the assembled chiefs and interrupted their commotion. Gathered lizard men, heed me. A majestic voice rang through the air. It silenced the immediate surroundings and made Shasuria's words sound exceptionally resonant. I confess that our enemy is numerous. Nobody made a sound, but everybody could sense the tremors in the air. After a brief pause, Shasuria spoke again. But there is no need to fear. For the first time in our history, the 5 tribes have come together as one. Through our alliance, we are now one tribe. Therefore, the ancestors of the 5 tribes will watch over us, even the spirits from other tribes will protect us. Priests. At this command, Crush stepped forward, at the head of the priests from the 5 tribes, and then she shucked her clothing to reveal her white scales. This is Crush Lulu, the leader of the high priests. Crush took another step forward as Shasuria called her by name. Summon the ancestors upon us. Listen well, children of the great tribe. How would this newly formed tribe turn out? With an iron determination in her voice, Crush went on and on. At times her voice was high-pitched, at times it was low-pitched, at times it sounded like she was growling, and at times it sounded like she was singing. At first, almost everyone was repulsed by Crush the albino. However, after seeing her unwavering confidence, that distaste gradually vanished. Crush's body swayed gently as she spoke, her white scales glittered in the light of the bonfire, the reflected light making it seem as though the spirits of the ancestors had descended upon Crush. There were looks of worshipful awe on everyone's faces. Now that the 5 tribes are one, it means the spirits of the 5 tribes will protect us all. Behold, ladies and gentlemen. Witness the advent of the numberless ancestors through the generations as they take their place beside you. Crush forcefully cast open her arms and pointed to the sky. Everyone looked up, but all they saw was an expanse of ordinary night sky. There was no spirits descending or anything. However, someone muttered something. Isn't there a light there? The faint voice grew louder, and several lizard men added, I see it. Someone said they saw a faint light, someone shouted about a lizard man, someone muttered about a gigantic fish, someone exclaimed that there was a child there, and someone muttered incredulously about an egg. There was only one thing within the hearts of the lizard men, that the spirits of their ancestors really were with them. The spirits have come to protect us. Thus, it only made sense that someone shouted exactly that. Feel it. Feel their power entering your bodies. Crush's voice seemed to speak directly to their souls. It sounded like it was coming from a faraway place, and very close by at the same time. As the lizard men heard her voice, they felt some kind of strength filling them. Feel it. Feel the strength which the ancestors of the 5 tribes have gifted you. Now, all the lizard men here definitely felt it. They could feel the intense power within them. This sense of hot-bloodedness wiped away their prior unease, their bodies glowed from within with warmth, as though they had just drunk wine. This was certain proof that the spirits of the ancestors had descended to the mortal realm. Crush turned her eyes away from the crowd of intoxicated-looking lizard men, and nodded to Shisuryu. Hear me, all you lizard men. The ancestors are now with us. The enemy outnumbers us, but will we lose? No. The air shook as the lizard men, with vaguely drunken looks on their faces, answered Shisuryu in unison. That's right. Now that the spirits of the ancestors are with us, there's no way we can lose. Let us defeat the foe and offer this victory to them. Oh! Everyone's morale was through the roof. In place of the uneasy lizard men from earlier, were now warriors hungry for battle. This was not the effect of charm magic. Even with this many druids, they did not have the luxury of casting spells on everyone here before the battle started. Rather, this was the result of the special beverage the lizard men had drunk before this ceremony began. Said beverage was a recipe passed down through the generations, which gave its drinkers courage. It was made with herbs which induced a brief period of intoxication, euphoria, and hallucinations in those who consumed it. The net result was a state of altered perception. Crush's spiel had been intended to buy time for the effects to kick in. When one knew the truth, it hardly seemed impressive at all. However, for the people witnessing this spectacle with their own eyes, in other words, the lizard men who saw the proof that their ancestors were walking with them, this ritual ignited the courage within them. Then, we shall begin applying the war paint. Originally, every tribe would have their own color, but now that the spirits of the 5 tribes reside within us all, we shall use the colors of each tribe for everyone. Several priests took up clay pots and walked among the lizard men. The lizard men decorated themselves using the paint from the pots. They believed that the ancestor spirits within them were guiding their hands, so they let their fingertips wander freely, tracing designs all over their bodies. Many of them painted their entire bodies, possibly thanks to this advent. However, almost none of the green claw lizardmen applied paint to themselves. This was because Zaryusu, Shisuryu, and the elite members of the tribes had not done so. In other words, it was a form of idol worship. After looking around and satisfying himself that everyone was done, Zaryusu drew his greatsword and pointed it at the village gate. Forward march! Oh! Countless roars rang through the air. Part 3. The troops from the great underground tomb of Nazareth were divided into 2 groups and stationed in the swamp. The zombie division was on the lizardmen's left flank, while the skeleton division was on their right. The skeleton archers and skeleton riders were stationed behind the other skeletons. The beast zombies were kept in the rear, as though they were a command company. The lizardmen facing them were also divided into 2 forces, despite their comparatively thin numbers. The hunters and the females were on the zombies' side, while the males and warriors were on the skeletons' side. Meanwhile, the priests remained within the village, defended by the walls. The lizardmen had come out of the village, because they knew that there was no point in laying up for a siege. There was no help coming for them, and the walls were anything but sturdy. In addition, the enemy was an army of the dead, who did not need rations or rest. Given these deeply unfavorable circumstances, a siege was a very bad idea. However, once the lizardmen had formed up outside, they keenly understood the tremendous disparity between their forces and those of the enemy. A situation where 1 faced 3 could still be compared to that of 10 facing 30. But if 1,000 had to fight 3,000, the vast difference in their respective strengths became very apparent. Even if 3,000 undead beings did nothing but stand in ranks, they were still a very intimidating sight. Despite the circumstances, the lizardmen did not show any signs of fear. Their ancestors were with them now, numbers counted for nothing to them. Soon, the undead forces began a slow advance. The zombies and skeletons began to move, while the skeleton archers and skeleton riders remained where they stood. Perhaps they were being held in reserve. The lizardmen advanced as well. Oh! The wetlands echoed with an ear-piercing shout, accompanied by the sound of countless splashes. Water was churned into foam and dirt flew everywhere. The 2 armies continued advancing, until they were on the verge of a ferocious clash. However, an abnormality arose in the Nazareth army. The zombies and the skeletons had begun their advance together, but as they moved forward, they gradually drew apart. This was because the zombies were slow while the skeletons were swift. In addition, the wetlands were very difficult terrain. When slow monsters like zombies were mired down in mud, their movements became even slower. However, agile monsters like skeletons were not as badly affected. Therefore, the first engagement was between the skeletons and the lizardmen warriors. The lizardmen employed no formations, simply crashing into the skeletons. There was no art in their technique, they simply swung whenever they saw an enemy. Leading the way were the 5 head warriors of the various tribes. To some extent, it was foolish for a commander to lead from the front. However, they were the highest-ranked warriors of their respective tribes, and morale would suffer if they did not fight at the head of their troops. Instead, the lizardmen were all in high spirits. They were backed by 89 armored warriors from the Razortail tribe. They wore hide armor and carried hide shields, and they possessed the highest defensive strength of any group among the tribes. They raised their shields, charging the skeleton horde as a single, united wall. Then, they clashed, the vanguards of the skeletons, and the lizardmen colliding with each other. In that moment, countless bones flew in all directions, and the lizardman squadron tore into the skeleton horde. The sounds of carnage shook the heavens, and the sounds of bone crunching seemed endless. There were occasional cries of pain, but those were drowned out by the sounds of shattering bone. The lizardmen had an incontestable advantage in this first engagement, and the tide of battle favored them. If the combatants were not lizardmen, but humans, the opposite would probably be the case. Skeletons were made of bones, so piercing weapons were almost completely ineffective against them, while they resisted slashing weapons to a certain extent. Therefore, human troops, who used blades and swords as their primary weapons, would have a hard time damaging those skeletons. The advantage of the lizardmen stemmed from the fact that they used crude maces and clubs as their primary weapons, which inflicted bludgeoning damage, the bane of skeletons. The lizardmen easily crushed the bony bodies of the skeletons with every swing of their weapons. Even if they survived one hit, the second would pulverize them. In contrast, the rusty longswords that the skeletons used were deflected by the tough scales and hides of the lizardmen. While some of them were hurt, nobody sustained any fatal wounds. This was the first charge. Almost 500 skeletons lay in fragments from that clash alone. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. Cocytus's jaw dropped as he stared at the vision within the mirror. This was only the first time they had stood toe to toe, but the strength of the lizard men had exceeded his expectations. As an excellent warrior himself, Cocytus possessed a degree of insight into the strength of his enemy. It was true that as individuals, the skeletons were clearly weaker than the lizard men, and they had no hope of victory. However, their numbers should have compensated for that weakness. Even so, this outcome had taken place. What was the meaning of this? It made him wonder if the lizard men had been strengthened by some other power. In all likelihood, only the skeleton archers and skeleton riders could claim victory over the lizard men as they were now. The skeletons crumbled one after the other as he watched the battle. The skeletons and zombies would probably only serve to sap their opponent's stamina. At this rate, the only effective troops we have are the 300 beast zombies, the 150 skeleton archers, and the 500 skeleton riders. The weight of numbers is now against us. Cocytus calculated the odds in his mind. The undead were strong, especially in extended battles. Almost nobody could beat them at that. The undead did not feel anything, not fear, not pain, not fatigue, or the need for sleep. The advantages those characteristics bestowed in warfare hardly needed to be stated. For instance, if one swung a mace at the head of a living creature, there was a high chance said creature would die, or if it survived, it would bleed profusely and suffer great pain. The person receiving the attack would naturally lose the will to fight. Of course, an exception had to be made for warriors who had been trained to endure great pain, but most people would not want to fight on. That was a perfectly natural reaction from living beings. But what about the undead? Crack their skulls? They would continue attacking while they leaked their brains with every blow. Break their arms? They would keep attacking with their shattered limbs. Chop off their legs? They would crawl to launch the next attack. Indeed, as long as the negative energy which served as their life force was not depleted, the undead would keep fighting. As long as the conditions for instant death were not met, decapitation was quite a common one for most low-tier undead beings. They would not lose the will to fight like humans would. In other words, the undead were perfect soldiers. It could not be denied that the lizardmen were currently superior, going by individual strength. However, that state of affairs might not carry one. Cocytus's opinion of the lizardmen went up by a notch, and he concluded that they were not a foe which could be instantly destroyed. That being the case, he had to draw up the battle. Should we pull back and wait for a chance to launch another attack? Your servant feels that would be the wisest move. Your servant is of the opinion that it would be better to mobilize the archers and cavalry. No, we should continue the attack until the enemy is exhausted. But what good does it do to exhaust the foe? If we cannot smash their headquarters, the enemy will eventually recover their strength. Indeed. The enemy seems to have a strong defense, but they are hiding behind those fragile walls. What about taking the village and then encircling them? After listening to his servant's responses, Cocytus picked up the message scroll and glanced at Entoma, trying to read her expression. Entoma looked disinterestedly at the mirror. She produced a green biscuit from somewhere and brought it to her chin, and soon, the sounds of crunching echoed through the room. That attitude seemed to be saying that she was unconcerned about the events that were unfolding. Perhaps that was why she had no expression on her face. No, that expressionless face was nothing more than a decoration. Cocytus thought about her true nature, and realized that trying to read her expression was a foolish gesture. She was a familiar eater. Even Cocytus's friend, Kyuhuko of the Five Worsts in Nazarick, had bluntly stated that she is a most frightening person. That was her true nature. Cocytus abandoned the plan of trying to divine her thoughts by reading her face, and unfurled the scroll, sending a message to the army's commander. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit, are they looking down on us? Zenburu muttered. He did so quietly, but it was still loud enough that everyone watching the enemy from the wall could hear it. They aren't mobilizing their archers or cavalry. That makes me think that they're looking down on us. Yes, I thought they'd come at us all at once. Zombie fight, going well. There were only 45 hunters fighting the zombies. They launched hit and run attacks with thrown stones, slowly drawing the zombies away from the skeletons. The females slowly moved to a position where they could flank the skeletons. Don't you think their movements are very suspicious? Indeed. The zombies were not so much diverted as completely distracted by the hunters. Would any commander permit such movements? No, it should not have been possible, yet the zombies were moving as described. That being the case, what did the enemy have in mind? Nobody present had any idea. I don't quite understand what they're doing. I'm with Shisuryu. No matter how hard thought about it, they did not feel there was any particular significance to the zombies' movements. After observing for a while longer, Zariusa shared his thoughts with the others. Could it be that there's no commander? No commander. Do you mean to say that the undead have been acting on the orders they were given at the beginning of the battle? Yes. The lowest-tiered undead like zombies and skeletons did not possess intelligence. Therefore, giving them orders at the appropriate moment was the best way of commanding them. However, the zombies and other enemies seemed to have received orders to kill any nearby lizardmen. That was what they were getting at. In other words, the enemy thought they could beat us by sheer weight of numbers. No, could it be that this battle is just to see how well they can fight without a commander? Seems that way. Bastards. Are they fucking with us? It was Shisuryu, not Zenburu, who was cursing. Even Shisuryu could not tolerate this sort of thing. After all, the lizardmen were all betting their lives on this. Calm down, Shisuryu. We don't know if that's the case yet. Sorry, though I guess it's good that we're doing well so far. Anija, you're right, because we need to cut down the enemy's numbers as much as possible right now. Battle was a very fatiguing activity, and a pitched melee was unimaginably taxing on one's mental strength. On a battlefield where one did not know if the enemy would be coming from the front, rear, left, or right, merely swinging one's weapon a few times was several times more exhausting than normal. However, the undead did not feel fatigue, and they would continue attacking without respite. This was the difference between the living and the dead, and as time went by, that difference would become more and more apparent. In other words, time was the lizardman's enemy. It would be fine if only I could fight. Patience, Zenburu. Indeed, if a mighty warrior like Zenburu took the field, they could probably wipe out the skeletons in moments. However, that would mean revealing their ace in the hole. Zarius's group of half a dozen people was their secret weapon. While they would obviously need to play their trump card in times of emergency, they could not reveal their true power as long as the situation was not dire, and if their greatest foe had not shown up yet. Still, if the enemy doesn't advance, doesn't that play right into our hands? Zariusa told the others, who responded in the affirmative. Then, he turned to Crush and asked, are things still okay on your side? Yes, and the ritual's going well too. Crush answered Zarius's question as she looked around the village. The ritual which the priests were conducting in the village might well be another trump card for the lizard men. Normally it would have taken a very long time, but since all the priests of all the tribes were gathered together, it was progressing at a tremendous pace, quickly enough to be used in this battle. So this is the power of cooperation. Yes. Granted, we did share some insights after that war in the past. Still, there's a lot of things I want to do after the war now. The other chiefs nodded vigorously at Shisuryu's suggestion. They had shared a lot of knowledge thanks to this battle, and they had seen with their own eyes the importance of everyone working together towards a common goal. The three chiefs who had allied in the past, but not exchanged information, were particularly forceful in their agreement. Zariusa looked at those 5 people, and smiled. What's so funny? It's nothing. I just felt really happy despite our circumstances. Crush immediately picked up on what he was thinking. Me too, Zariusu. As he looked on the smiling Crush, Zariusa's eyes narrowed as though she were shining. They had looks of admiration and kindness in their eyes. It was only natural that they were not embracing. After all, they could not indulge their desires while lizardmen were dying before them. However, Zariusa's and Crush's tails seemed like independent creatures as they twitched, occasionally touching and separating. Moo, do you know what this situation is, as an older brother? We've been completely shut out. Ah, they really do love each other. In short, good to be young, future is bright. The 4 older lizardmen nodded as they looked on their adorable juniors. Of course, there was no way Crush and Zariusa could not have heard that. Their tails moved and twitched without pause, but they had serious and proper expressions on their faces. Anija, the enemies making their move. Shisurio and the other chiefs could not help but smile bitterly at the sudden change in Zariusa's attitude. At the same time, they cast their eyes toward the enemy formation. The skeleton riders were advancing en masse. Oi oi oi, don't tell me they're heading for us? The cavalry? Are they planning to shake our morale by striking directly at us? No, they should be planning to circle around the warriors and the males and then flank them, right? This was bad. Everyone came to the same conclusion without saying a word. The mobility of the skeleton riders was hard to deal with. If the skeleton riders had moved out at the beginning of the battle, they would have prioritized their destruction. However, the warriors and the male lizardmen were currently locked in melee combat, the hunters were drawing off the zombies, and the females were flanking the skeletons with thrown rocks, so there was precious little manpower left to block the skeleton riders. It looks like it'll be better if we make the first move. Shisuria nodded after the small Fong tribe's chief spoke. The question now is who we should send out, or rather, who we should allow to fight first. Diamond suit skeleton riders. They were lance-wielding skeletons mounted on skeletal horses. They had no special characteristics beyond their enhanced mobility, but said mobility was outstanding on this marshy terrain. Their bodies were made of bone, and would not sink too deeply into the mud, which meant that they could advance at the speed of a regular horse. Nearly 100 skeleton riders were moving forward, intent on circling around behind the lizard men to destroy them from behind. They saw 3 lizard men approaching from their front and left, in other words, from the village, but the skeleton riders paid them no heed. They had not received orders to engage them, so they would ignore them as long as they did not attack. Unintelligent undead were such creatures. Just as they were about to reach the rear of the lizardman forces, the leading skeleton rider's world was suddenly flipped and turned upside down. The horseman flew far into the air and crashed heavily to the marsh. A human would have been confused and been unable to act. However, the skeleton rider was an unintelligent undead being, and it immediately continued moving to fulfill its orders. Though it rose quickly, it had been injured, and so it moved with a bit of a limp. Just then, it was hit by another unhorsed skeleton rider, and the shattered bones of the 2 skeleton riders were scattered all over the marsh. Scenes like this were happening everywhere. Why had something like this happened on the wide-open wetlands? The answer was simple: it was a trap. There had been open wooden boxes buried in the marsh, and when the skeleton horses stepped into them, they had fallen. The skeleton riders fell one after the other. If they were humans, they would have slowed their pace. However, the skeleton riders would not do that. While they had enough judgment to avoid a hole they were aware of, they had no ability to be wary of traps. This was because they had no orders to do so, and no intelligence to allow them to adapt to the situation. Their headlong rush into the traps looked like a form of mass suicide.